who am I? Why am I talking to you today? I do hold an airline transport pilot certificate. I do have 3 type ratings in the Hawker 1000, the Jetstream 41 19-seat turboprop, and the Falcon 50 and 900, which I have flown all over the world as a first officer and a captain. I flew the DC-9, and for historians, I flew DC-9-10 serial number 2 in airline service, and yes, I was sitting in the right seat, and yes, the wet compass was up behind my right shoulder. You know, I've participated, I guess, in an important piece of aviation history. My last professional ride was the 737-800, which anyone who lives downtown hears going over their heads all day long. I flew that for ATA Airlines before they went bankrupt. I had nothing to do with that. Before my flying career, I was a litigation attorney, and after my flying career, I had a 15-year career as a consultant in hiring, where I specialized in helping aviation and aerospace companies, including some of the biggest in the world, like Boeing, Northrop Grumman, hire and retain in-house attorneys. And when I retired from that, I wrote this. The novel Flygirl is my very first book, and it's about a trailblazing female pilot who experiences significant obstacles as she tries to advance in her career. Look, folks, I do a lot of events, and I talk to a lot of different groups. This book is based, it's fiction, but it's based on my actual experience as a corporate pilot in the late 90s, when I became the first woman to be hired by a Fortune 100 corporate flight department into a group full of men who had all been flying together a really long time. And needless to say, there was some challenges. And they included, you know, I'm going to use the words harassment, discrimination, and some bullying. And those challenges form the basis of my story. Now, the last thing I want to do today, especially in front of this august group, which is mostly men, is lecture you about those things or make anyone feel responsible for what happened. So let me put it this way. I would defy any of you, of any age, of any sex, of any ethnic background, sitting in this group today, to deny that there has been a time in your life when you have felt underappreciated, isolated, undervalued. I mean, it's part of the living experience in some situations. So this book, the journey experienced by my main character, is really, and was intended to be, the journey of us all. Women at work in aviation. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about a piece of aviation's history, the environment that it's created for working women, what's changed, and what really hasn't. Let's talk pilots, since that's really what I know. From our friends in the FAA, and they are here to help us, there are approximately 610,000 rated pilots in the United States. 7.1% are women. 6.32% are commercial pilots. 4.38% are airline pilots. When I was flying professionally, the number of female airline transport pilots was approximately 6%. Today it is, anyone?
6%.
That's right.
What?
That's right. Approximately 6%.
Oh, same.
It has not changed. Other aviation careers, engineers, AMTs, aviation maintenance technicians, the STEM jobs, women make up less than 24% of those careers in any industry nationally, and very, very few in aviation. Well, why? Are we not smart enough? What do you think? I don't think that's it. Are we not interested? Are women just not interested in the career? Well, this is an interesting statistic. 13% of student pilot certificates, which is, as you know, the entree, you got to start somewhere, and the way we start in aviation is with a student pilot certificate, and this excludes the military, obviously, if you're a military trained pilot. It's 13%. But by the time we get up to airline transport pilot, that number goes down to 6. The heroine of this book is a woman named Tris Miles, And her passion for aviation is kindled at a very young age. I'm going to read you a passage from the book. Well, here's our heroine on her way to interview for what she thinks is going to be the job of her dreams, and she remembers how she became enamored with flying in the first place, and see how relevant this might be to some of you. Tris watched a 747 on final approach above her, its 4 engines hanging off the wings, massive gear assembly down. It probably moved at 160 knots, but appeared to float toward the runway. The majesty of this enormous jet had awed Tris ever since she was a little girl. Grandpa Ed had introduced her to flying. On Sundays, he would come over early and have breakfast with Tris and her parents. Let's go, Princess Patricia. Let's see the miracle of flight, he'd say, as he wiped his mouth and drained his cup of black coffee. Which I wish I had mine here right now. She'd jump from the table, kiss her parents goodbye, and run out to Grandpa's truck. They'd make the 2-hour drive from the tiny town of Pittston to the big city airport. Tris would watch the cornfields roll by as Grandpa's old pickup bounced along with his hands on the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel. When the terminal doors opened, she would run to the plate glass window, looking over the ramp, pressing her nose up against the glass and trying to rub it against the bullseye tip of a 747 parked at the gate, white with a red stripe, the letters TWA painted on the side. Grandpa, it's so big. How can it fly? He'd smile down at his only grandchild. That's the miracle, Princess. So we're interested, but statistics show that our ranks thin out considerably as we rise. So let's join our friend Tris again. She gets this job. She's very excited. She's on her first observation flight with 2 company pilots, one of whom is a retired Navy commander, and whose name is Ed Dieter, who has been assigned to do her in-house training. And there's another pilot who's along with them. And, you know, they're just sitting around. Any of you ever fly corporate? You know, well, airline too, frankly. There's an awful lot of sitting around. Here they are sitting around in the aircraft. Dieter turned his head to the side momentarily, then swiveled around to face Tris directly. So, how exactly did you get this job? Ross's head shot straight up and bobbed like one of those dolls in the windshield of a car. I submitted a resume. I interviewed. Caught off guard, her response sounded sarcastic, but that's exactly what happened. Yeah, we heard about that interview. Ross stared at Dieter like the older man had lost his mind, but that didn't stop him. We weren't invited, were we, Larry? Dieter turned to Ross, who looked like if speaking would cause him actual physical harm. Ross finally said something like, Oh, come on, Larry, Dieter continued. You know that one day they just told us they hired her, and when she was starting. They promised we'd get a chance to meet all potential new hires, and then she just shows up. He paused to sip his coffee and looked at Tris. Nothing personal, folks. Ross searched maniacally for something in his briefcase, and Dieter's glare never left Tris. She looked right back at him and said, I really wanted to meet you guys too. I was sure I'd enjoy flying with you. I'll bet. Dieter's exasperation was palpable. You know, we had a lot of guys who wanted this job, guys with military experience, jet experience, years and years of flying crap for substandard outfits waiting for a chance like this. And they chose you. Well, I wanted to see the country. I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to fly international, not just pull up to the gate in Cleveland and head back to Exeter. I wanted to see things. She held out her 2 open palms. And I wanted to fly there myself. I want to pull up in the ramp in the cockpit in Beijing and London and Moscow as captain of the Astral, which is a fake airplane I made up. Captain? Dieter's face burned red. Little language here. Are you fucking kidding me? You're talking about being a captain? You just got here, lady, and if you think Ed, shut up, will ya? Ross said, Tris, look, I think Ed just wants to know why you took the job. You had a pretty good airline gig, right? They were all quiet. Seconds passed like hours. I can't think of a better life, Tris said at last. Neither can I. I earned this life flying for my country. Dieter lifted his cup and drank his coffee, but she could hear the echo of the unasked question. What did you do? In 2018, interestingly enough, 2018 this is, just last year, there were 2 studies. One was conducted by the American Association of Flight Attendants, which is the union of all flight attendants. It said 2/3 of flight attendants had experienced harassment on the job. 68% of those felt that their employers did nothing to correct the issue. Later that year, probably in response to this, Women in Aviation International, which is a group that I have been a member of for over 20 years, sent out a confidential survey asking its members if they had ever experienced any type of harassment or discrimination in the workplace, offensive comments, hiring, firing, race discrimination, promotion discrimination, request for quid pro quo. Is there anyone in this room that doesn't know what that means? Advances and sexually oriented materials. Okay, I have to tell you a little vignette, a real true story. When I trained for ATA Airlines on 737-800, I finished my training, and I went out for IOE, which is called Initial Operating Experience, where you have to fly your first 20 hours with a training captain and hand you on. I walk into the cockpit to start doing my pre-flight checks, and on the captain's seat, 2 magazines, Jugs and Maxim. And I'm looking at him, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do about this. So the captain comes in, and he's all red-faced. He goes, I'm really sorry about this. He goes, I don't know what to do. And I said, why don't you just keep the Jugs, and I'll take the Maxim, and we'll just make it fair. And you had to respond in ways like that. Otherwise, you were called the B word. Something like that didn't really bother me very much, but it did bother, some of the people that I flew with. I had been an attorney. I'd seen and heard a lot worse. But a lot of the women I flew with had, actually. So in moments like that, or like Tris just had on the airplane with the 2 captains she's flying with, where we have all been made to feel marginalized or made to feel small, sometimes we feel like we had no voice. Or even if we did, there were some significant consequences to using it. So now we're going to join our friend Tris after she returns from a grueling, and if any of you have ever flown internationally, you know what I mean, a grueling 10-day, 12-city European trip she took with Dieter and Ross. Ross got drunk on the road and came to her hotel room. And during an in-flight mechanical failure, Dieter lost his cool and called her a very bad name. So here she is considering her options moving forward with her friend Danny. So let's see. I have to do something. I have to tell someone, but who? Tell? Danny vehemently shook his head. You don't tell anyone. Who's called her short? Keep this a secret? No way. Danny, what are you saying? I can't let this go. This is a new level of disrespect. And in the cockpit during an emergency? That's when he's supposed to be at his most professional, and he lost it. Why not tell someone? Isn't that what you do? Danny sighed. Probably. But this is tricky under the best of circumstances. Even in a situation like this, when just saying that word makes someone guilty, politics still plays a role. You're not one of the guys. They'll protect their own. But they'll find out. I'm sure someone heard him, the passengers. She pressed Danny for another answer. Didn't she have a duty to report it? Tris, this type of thing will come back on you if you talk to someone. Dieter deserves to get in trouble, and he will, for a little while. Maybe get his wrist slapped, maybe more. But this could blow up your career. Me? How does this come back on me? One captain grabs her, the other calls her a word that begins with C and ends with T and has 4 letters. And her career is in jeopardy? But she knew. Of course she knew. If you complained, then you played the woman card. That type of story that you tried to get some kind of advantage or get someone in trouble spread like fire. Soon it won't be, well, he showed up at my room drunk and horny. It'll be, she came on to me. And Dieter will find something you did wrong or should have done, and it'll follow you everywhere you go. Danny was right. She could tell nothing but the absolute truth, and still the whispers and comments, the wariness would follow her. And she'd be destroyed. No one would trust her again. Tris was counseled not to speak because of the potential consequences, all too real in her world. And again, this book is based on actual experiences, so I remember what it was like when I had to make a similar choice. So what's changed? Well, again, I don't speak in front of any group unless I do some research. And doing research, I found a piece in the New York Times opinion section dated not December 10th, 1982, but dated December 10th, 2019, last week. And the title was, "The Airline Industry's Sexism Problem." You can look it up yourself. It addresses the challenges that airline pilots who are working mothers have. Apparently, the point is not that the airline industry is set up to challenge them. It's just set up to exclude them, and that's the issue. So, what has really changed? I would posit to you, we're talking about numbers that haven't changed in 30 years. We're talking about situations. You know, the issue of, you know, some guy isn't standing there and saying, oh, I want to discriminate against working mothers. The problem is they just don't think about it. They just don't think about when the mothers come back to work, when they get their seats back, and, you know, there are some physical things they need to do, and they need a place to do it safely, you know, not in the lab, you know, 5 minutes before top of descent. And you know, the answer has always been historically, hire more women. In the 80s and 90s, lawsuits and a policy you all may remember called affirmative action forced airlines and aviation employers to hire more women, which is just, you know, what you want to do to make people welcome is force them, you know, into a place. They hired women because they had to. And the women ran into a lot of roadblocks because the employers were like, well, I did what I was supposed to do, sink or swim on your own. I would suggest to you, after a 15-year career as an executive search consultant, that just hiring is not the answer. Hiring bumps up your numbers, and numbers are important. I spent a year working in-house at a company you may have heard of called Amazon. And I am telling you, if you walk into a meeting there and you don't have numbers, nobody will listen to a word you say. I mean, a lot of places it's about statistics. What numbers can you show? But real cultural change takes more than that. It takes a commitment. It takes an investment of time and money. And it takes wanting to change, to hire leaders, and not just plop them in a chair and say, look, here's a leader we hired, let them lead. Which will make you uncomfortable, I guarantee you, because, you know, I'm assuming a lot of you in here are pilots. I mean, who could possibly be more type A? And I'm a pilot and an attorney, so, you know, don't get in my way when I'm going for that coconut donut. You know, hire leaders and let them lead. Give them a voice. Don't just let them sit there looking very attractive, I might add. Because we have a word for that begins with T and rhymes with broken. Hire people who can be role models at every level, even at the bottom levels. You know, I mean, I always used to say, you know, people would say, well, if you're a pilot, you're not a professional. If you're a janitor, you're not a professional. And in my humble opinion, a professional is anyone doing any job that cares about the job, cares about the outcome, and cares how they conduct themselves when they are doing that job. So I think the way to begin to inspire more women, not just to come into aviation, but to stay, is to learn how to think differently about the environment and recognize that any qualified individual who is sitting in a seat is more than likely deserves to be there. You know, we used to joke, some of the women I was coming up with and we used to joke about the fact that, you know, like Ed Dieter, which is an exaggerated, exaggerated story, but, you know, people like that would think that, well, women would just get the job, they just plop them in the seat. I'm like, you have to be qualified. You know, I mean, you don't just walk in the room, show them your driver's license, and get put in the right seat of a Falcon jet or a 737. You have got to have the qualifications. So Trish's story doesn't end with where we left it. She finds support in some unlikely places, and places I think some of the retired and ex-military people would find very interesting. And I guess you're wondering, does her career continue? Well, I'm standing here, right? Thank you very much, and I will take your questions. Sir.
Okay, when we're doing tours of the museum, we get middle school and high school,
Attorney and aviation.
males and females.
Right.
And almost without exception, every time I ask them, well, do you want to go into aerospace? Every one of the women says no, and then I look at the mother that's with them, and gee, where'd she get that attitude?
I got it from my mother. I told her I wanted to be an astronaut. It's in the book. And she said, no, no, no. Women don't do that.
Well, the point I was going to bring up is in our everyday lives, for instance, when we give a tour of the museum, our space exhibit has a console where people can sit and answer questions, and it comes up with 3 career fields that they could get in aerospace. And the girls are always surprised because when they put in their likes and dislikes, there they are looking at job positions like flight director, director of research and stuff like that, and it's concepts that they just weren't familiar with.
That's right.
But my point is, it's kind of hard to backfill that kind of ignorance.
I don't disagree with you. And that's why I talked about cultural change. Look, the kind of cultural change that I'm talking about is not like, oh, I think I'm not going to eat carbs today, you know? Or it is moving the needle on something like this is excruciating. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of commitment. And to be perfectly frank with you, I doubt it'll happen in my lifetime. Or frankly, anyone in this room. Sir?
Well, first of all, I find what you have to say very interesting and important. And, you know, as being an attorney, I'm an attorney as well, I'm a pilot. I'm wondering what's the difference, you think, between the attorney field where you now have more women students, at least in law school, and probably maybe in the attorney field, versus the pilot community, which hasn't had that same result.
Well, you know, I always used to say, I mean, I ran into a lot of obstacles when I was an attorney too. I graduated from law school in '83. I'm 60 years old. And so I was practicing in the 80s and early 90s before I made my career switch to aviation. And I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the stuff that some of the attorneys would say. I mean, because I looked really young at that time. That hasn't changed. But I used to say, and then I went into aviation, and the disrespect was really more severe. And I used to say there were bigots in both careers, but the attorneys were a better educated group of bigots. Because they all had master's degrees, obviously, to be an attorney. And while the pilots were well educated, mostly in technical fields, you know, the higher you go up the education chain, the more sophisticated you become in hiding what you really need. So I would say, the legal field has changed significantly because it's the people who have been disenfranchised by it that are doing the changing. You know, we've never, I don't think, in aviation, you know, you're always reading about Tammy Jo Schultz. Everybody knows who she is, right? She just released a memoir based on the catastrophic engine failure that she had in the 737. And, you know, we are all focused in on her because she's one in a million. You know, the attorneys, the female attorneys, you're exactly right. I do believe that licensed attorneys, right around 50-50, male-female, they don't stick out as much. You know, so we don't talk about it as much. But I recently spoke at a conference, a keynote speaker, in front of a group of female attorneys, and a lot of the issues, advancement issues, have not changed. Have not changed.
Kind of a follow-up, my guess is the closeness of the flight deck, which we used to call another word.
Don't disagree.
And also, the being away from family might play a role as well.
Well, part of it, you know, I mean, the closest in the flight deck, not for nothing, but I know how to quote movie lines and tune Rush Limbaugh in on the HF radio. You know, I'm not going to say that hadn't happened to me a few times. And I don't know how many retired or current airline pilots we have in the room, but if there are any, you know what we talk about up front. We talk about the contract, how we're not making enough money, how the schedule sucks, and how crew scheduling is beating us up. That is a conversation, and I am here to tell you that will take you all the way from Newark to San Francisco. I know this for a fact.
You ought to see the pay scale here.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm guessing for y'all, you know, no contract, sir.
So I'm wondering about how much of the discrimination, the harassment, et cetera, is top down rather than bottom up?
In my experience, and I can only speak for myself and friends of mine who I talked to about their experiences when I wrote this book, it's almost exclusively top down, because bottom up, you just ignore it. You know?
But I mean top as in like at the very top.
Oh, well, culture starts at the top.
Right.
We used to say
Right.
in my second book, which I'm finishing up right now, we use a phrase in aviation called the captain sets the tone, right?
Right.
And the CEO sets the tone for their organization.
And
they do what they're taught to do.
I say that.
And that's like children too. Do what you're taught, right, Cheryl?
I'm actually not a pilot.
That's fair. I like you. Anyway.
I'm actually I'm an academic internal medicine physician who's had multiple different positions getting here eventually to San Diego 12 years ago.
All right, Doc.
And of the 7 different places I've had, I've experienced places where the culture was terrific,
Right.
where everybody was respected, where it was a wonderful place to work and live, and other places where it was that way and then turned because somebody took over at
Leadership.
the top
Right.
and made it toxic, and that's happened all along.
Well, that's what I say. You have to hire leaders and let them lead. You have to hire the right types of leaders. Look, I don't want to leave anyone in this room thinking that my entire 12-year aviation career was like this every day. I worked for an airline for a while before it went out of business. Some of you may have heard of it called Midwest Express out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And that's where I flew the DC-9. And I took that job on January 1st, 2001, and lost it in October when there were mass layoffs after a pretty significant tragedy we faced, which some of you may recall. And I will never forget it as long as I live on this earth. When I went to hand my badge in to my chief pilot, who I adored, I was bawling like a baby. I loved the environment, I loved the training. Could have done without the DC-9 and the wet compass above my right shoulder. Something a little newer would have been nice. But I would never have left there because the culture was ridiculous. Definitely, hands down, the best chief pilot I ever worked for. And he set the tone.
Right.
Great training. They didn't care if I was male, female, undecided, or an aardvark. I was treated exactly the same way everyone else was treated. Now, that wasn't always very nice. But, in aviation, sometimes you just got to get it done. As a captain at Atlantic Coast Airlines, I remember I had a first officer. He was very needy, and I had to pee like a racehorse. And I said to him, I said, please, Derek, go get the flight plan. I got to run to the ladies' room. We're never going to make it back to Dulles. Well, I'm not set up to do that. Oh, excuse me. Pick up the piece of paper, carry it to the airplane. Robin, you're setting me up for failure. And so I had to make another decision. Don't worry, I did ultimately go to the bathroom and everything was fine. But you don't, sometimes you just have to be curt and short, which of course as a native New Yorker I had no trouble being, and just get the job done. And like we used to say, we'll talk about it on the ground. We always would do it when I was captain. We would always do a debrief, and if I had crossed a line, I would expect my first officer to tell me, and that's how we kept it real in the cockpit. So that's how there were good cultures and bad cultures, and that's how cultures change. Come on, I know you have one, and I know you have one too. I'm not ignoring it. Go ahead.
In my Navy career and everything, I went through true transitions, really. We really started getting many more blacks in officer training and pilots and NFOs and everything. Went through that whole era, and then later we started getting the women in. And they were two very similar but different transitions.
That's right.
And I see both of them as transitions.
I agree. You're an officer, right? You were an officer,
Yeah.
obviously. And that's how a leader sees it. And thank you for your service. Every cultural group brings something different with them, including you know, the culture of the white male. I mean, you know, you have needs. You know, there are ways to persuade you to do your best. And I think at the end of the day, all that really matters is treat everyone the same. I mean, if you're going to
But
be
you can't.
well, yeah.
That's the problem.
I'm not sure I agree with you about that.
Well, I'll give you an example. I was in a jail bunk room, and we had a black guy with us. And I remember at the time, this was back in the late 60s and everything, it was, "Hey boy, how you doing?" And I said that to Jim one time, and he looked down at me and he says, "Bill, my name is Jim." And I thought, you know, okay, I can accept that, and I even understand where he's coming from, but what that means to me is I've got to treat him differently. I can't treat him like one of the guys now. In there, you had to be so careful on what you said, anything you did, even how you looked. I mean, it was a different...
And what were we talking about? Change is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, and it's hard.
Yes.
And you have to be, like I said, just hiring more women or African Americans or blacks. I still call them blacks. And by the way, most of my black friends prefer to be called black, which, you know, this whole African American thing gets me a little bit.
Yes.
But, you know, if that's what you prefer, that's
It's not
what
that
I'll call
anymore, it's people of color.
People of color. Well,
If you can't be your mind.
listen, and that's fine. And you know, they've had a pretty hard haul in our history, so I'll let them do whatever they want. But my point is, you have to accept the fact that changes are coming, and it sucks, and it's hard, and we are all going to be uncomfortable for a little while we execute the change. But it's not forever, is it? I mean, you know, after a while, things even out.
That's kind of what I was bringing
Yeah.
up, is I think that the transition through the black era has gone fairly well its course, and I think that the transition to women in the workforce is also progressing. It's just a little bit behind.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, you know, again, if the African Americans or blacks were men, obviously, they were encouraged to do things that other men would do. You know, as girls, we were not always encouraged to do those things. So I agree with you. I think that's probably why. Yes, Linda. It's the want on both sides. You know, you can't do it by yourself. You can't just, you know, and I've made the mistake of going into a work environment where I was considered mostly a curiosity despite my credentials, and just kind of having the attitude, well, I'm here, you got to accept me, and that's not appropriate either. You know, if you're asking other people to take your sensibilities into consideration, then you have to take theirs. You know, so going in there with your elbows up and poking at people is not the way to get accepted. But as a pilot saying, "Oh, sir, may I?" That was unacceptable also, because, you know, you're dealing with lives. You know, I've sat next to male pilots, I'm not going to lie, who were about to kill me. And, you know, too slow, too low, too slow, good grief, you know, afraid to goose the power because, you know, on a 20,000-foot runway they might land a little long. And I had to say something. You know, it's my job. You know, I've got people in the back. So,
Well, you're gonna treat a rock in a hard place, because if you don't say anything,
no, there is
nothing's ever going to
there
change.
is no rock and hard place. You
You
say
say
something. You say something.
You're in
Because
trouble. So,
I don't care. People's lives at risk. I don't care if I'm
If you had to arrive at that.
Well, I did. I had no trouble though.
I have two questions or comments. In that instance, and in the one where you had the guy wouldn't pick up the flight plan, I mean, that's kind of a management issue. All like straighten out, get rid of the slackers, or train them, or management needs to have a hammer. These are this is what you're supposed to be operating at. And if you don't, no matter what your race or what your sex or
Right.
whatever, you need to do your job criteria. And if you don't, you then step up or see the door.
Yep.
So I worked in the local government for almost 40 years. And we had some of the same trouble when,
Yeah, it's a tough time booting people out, I would imagine.
well, yes, especially the slackers. And management was just the people who could say yes to the interview that they wanted to hear, and they pretty much sat on their ass. And we had very few leaders. And if somebody was going to do a problem, they said, well, you do the work, because, you know, you're reliable and yet I'm gonna get in. So he gets the same check, the same bonus, everything,
There you
but
go.
we do the work. So again, no matter what, those people need to be.
No,
like,
it's management, it's a
gone.
management issue, and in that particular job, as a matter of fact, in both situations, with the guy who was trying to kill me and with that first officer, it was also an excellent job. It was an excellent airline job. I was very close to my chief pilot. And, you know, I was able to bring these things to his attention, and they would be addressed. You know, it wasn't like going to rat on a guy, but saying, hey, I had an experience, this is what the first officers are being taught, you know, you may want to look at this. And then, of course, I went into the training department, so I had the opportunity to change it, you know, myself. I don't disagree with you. This is all, you know, culture is top down. Everything about culture is top down. I have worked with, you know, hundreds of companies, hundreds all over the world, and I've seen great cultures. I have seen really, really bad ones, and the ones that the thing that all of the great cultures have in common is commitment to being a great culture and being welcoming. You know, I'm not going to lie, I had a little bit of trepidation about coming into this room today and talking about what I had to talk about, and then I thought to myself, you know, to be at the level that all of you are and doing what you're doing, you know, you may agree with me, you may not agree with me, but you're all going to listen, and you know, you're all going to think about the things that I'm saying, and you most certainly have. Other questions? Cheryl?
In your story, Truth Miles, of course, you know, had experienced a lot of discrimination. In your career, did you have any men or women who supported you?
Listen, I have 5,500 flight hours, and I started flying in the 90s. If it weren't for men, there is no way I could have gotten, because what did I just say? There are very, very few women in aviation, so who were my flight instructors? Who were my captains? Who were my airline trainers? Who were my chief pilots? A lot of them look like the people in this room, and I owe them my entire career. You know, if I had trouble in training, who was it that went to bat for me? My flight instructor. You know, if I had trouble on a trip, who would go to bat for me? Who would counsel me? Who would debrief me? You know, I would have had no career, but for some really incredible people, I would say 99% men that I met along the way. Thanks, Cheryl. That's a good question.
I think one of the first things you said that addresses the culture was right at the start of your presentation. And you said you were talking about, if you look at a pilot, you should look at the pilot qualifications, their knowledge and their skills. If you look at an attorney, you should look at their qualifications and their skills. It doesn't matter which profession you go into, if you look at them as a pilot, not as a male pilot or a female pilot or an African American, whatever you want to, you know, terms, you know, this identity thing, I think gets out of the fact that if you're a qualified pilot there to do your professional job, that's all that really should matter.
I agree.
And if we can get that instilled into the leadership of our cultures, then that would be important.
I think it would be
But I think-
extremely important.
I think that's the real key right there, is people need to look at people as their qualifications and their experience dictate,
That's
not
right.
by what you
In a
experience.
professional environment.
Could be
you
a
know.
tall person in a short period, it doesn't matter. If they're a qualified pilot, they're a qualified pilot, let's deal with them as a qualified pilot.
Sir?
My second question was, I just recently put my son to helicopter flight school. It's quite expensive.
Yes, it is.
So I was wondering if you think that is a detriment to, or the path to getting more, not just female pilots, but pilots in general. Because I have a friend who was a military pilot and he's flying for United. And he told me, if you're a pilot now, pretty soon there's going to be a large shortage, and you could, if you have multi-engine rating, you can get whatever you want, you know, pretty much. But I just think the entrance is really high. You know, the cost is really high.
Unbelievable.
And a lot of the private schools, you can't get a student loan because it's not
That's right.
accredited. So it's just really difficult. And so, but that's why you get a lot of ex-military guys, and they can use the
Military
GI
pays
Bill
to train them.
to get their pilot training. So that's, again, you have it's a long road and it's expensive.
I paid for my flight training 100% out of my own pocket while I was working 12 hours a day as an attorney, studying at night, and flying at the airport every weekend. And I went from 0 time to CFIIMEI in 16 months. And the cost would astound you even today. So I understand what you're talking about. I'm also a commercial instrument rated helicopter pilot.
Yeah, so is my son.
Yeah, and I flew the civilian version of the Black Hawk, the Sikorsky S-76B model. Any of y'all Black Hawk folks here? And I hated every minute of it because there, as you all know, a helicopter has absolutely no aerodynamic properties. And if you lose an engine and you're unable to auto-rotate, you are basically a brick in space and you're going to splat when you hit the ground. I prefer something that, you know, lets you glide. This, I have been hearing for 30 years about a pilot shortage. I have been hearing that if you get a multi-engine rating, you can write your own ticket. You gotta do the work.
Well,
You gotta get the
I would
experience.
understand that.
Nobody is gonna hire you with 50 hours
Well, no.
or 100 hours and a CFI. Nobody. So, and getting the flight time, doing the flight instructing, you know, work flying with students who are also trying to kill you. Let me tell you, man. There's an experience I don't look forward to ever having again. Any? Cheryl?
How long did it take you to write the book?
Oh, God. So, when all the stuff that I write about in Flygirl was happening, this was in the middle 90s, and I was having a really hard time with it. So, of course, I had a background in law, and I liked to write, so I started fictionalizing it. I started telling a story, and I came up with 83 pages in Word Perfect. Anyone remember that? And I stuck it in a manila folder.
That's an
Some of you
artifact.
can see, this says book, and I schlepped this bad boy around with me for 20 years until 2015 when I finally decided to finish it. So it either took me 4 years or 25 years. One or the other. My book is on sale today. If any of you would be interested in buying it, I'm happy to sign it for you. If you'd like to buy multiple copies, nothing makes me happier. And my card is there. Please take a free bookmark if you'd like one. I'm very, very easy to reach if you have further questions. Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more.
Do you still fly?
Sure. I'm current instrument and aircraft crunch in single engine, but I don't fly professionally. I mean, boy, you know, if I could find a co-pilot gig in the 50 or the 900, that would be perfect. But they're hard to come by. And frankly, you know, at this stage of my life, there are people looking for those jobs that need to feed themselves and their families. And I'm more than happy to let them have that chance. But yeah, I'm current. Yes, Ron, my favorite.
For anybody who's looking for a job, I understand the Air Force is now offering $1 million bonus to pilots.
Not my age.
There's also a lot of companies that are offering ab initio training for younger people.
They are.
And there's one company, and I forget who it is, Dudley, take note, they will pay for an Army helicopter pilot to transition to
They
fixed
will.
wing.
And I'm just going to tell you, I don't mean to insult anyone in this room, but I was an experienced captain flying an airplane without an autopilot in actual instrument conditions up and down the East Coast. That 250-hour rotorcraft transition pilot is the last person I wanted in the right seat with me, but I'm just saying.
Captain Kardon, you reminded me of the old Chinese curse of may you live in interesting times.
Indeed.
And times of transition are always interesting.
Aren't they though? It was an honor. Thank you.